everyone, thank you so much for joining me on another episode of our Canadian Blockchain Consortium podcast. My name is Clay Carrington. I'm the Executive Director of our consortium, and I'm really excited to be here today interviewing Matt McGuire. So I'm going to give you a little bit of background on Matt before we kick into the interview. So very few people in Canada that I've met have the breadth of knowledge of regulatory and compliance issues in this cryptocurrency sector as Matt does. He has his own company. He's the co-founder and practice director of the AML Shop, which is a Toronto-based consultancy, and it focuses primarily on businesses dealing with digital currencies to help them understand as well as optimize their risk management. So he's had a really long career in the finance services sector, and he's provided some really key strategic advice to the Canadian, American, as well as some international governments. And he's led some incredible major initiatives at the US financial institutions like Deloitte. So as a former leader of the National Anti-Money Laundering Practice, MNP, and holding the very rare and awesome title of Certified Cryptocurrency Investigator, his unparalleled expertise acts as a bridge between emerging world of digital finance and conventional financial systems. So thank you, Matt, for joining me today. I'm really excited to get your unique insights on the regulatory challenges that are facing cryptocurrencies in Canada, how digital asset businesses can optimize their compliance, and what the growing adoption of Bitcoin by major corporations means for the industry. So thanks for joining us, Matt.
It's my pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
All right, so I'm going to kick it off with my first question. Your past experience in leadership in anti-money laundering, as well as cross-border compliance, was specializing in cryptocurrencies like a natural progression for you? And how did you become first interested in this sector?
Oh, no doubt. Listen, anti-money laundering was far less fun when it was just about risk-rating checking accounts. When Bitcoin started to become a thing, I had to gravitate towards it. It was, it was fascinating because at the time it was anarchistic, and starting early on studying it and showing up at seminars in dodgy basements. It was a world that seemed to be evolving quickly. And I'll never forget the first time in Vancouver I was invited to speak, and it was on a ratty couch in the basement of a building, and it was just fascinating to me that with a QR code I could pay for the beer that I took out of the fridge. And so after that, it was fascinating that the value was going up. There was more and more, there were more and more companies coming to ask for consulting about how it was going to fit into their traditional models, and so I kept studying. There was some inertia around the sorts of engagements I was getting. Word spread, and started surrounding myself with more folks, and then the expert witness work started, right? So that with any store of value, there's going to be some greed and some nefarious activities, and so once the fraud cases started popping up, then it was, well, let's take the forensic accounting training and the crypto training and figure out how to marry the two together. So it really was a natural evolution, and it's been a ton of fun since.
Nice. Have you been back on that couch ever since? Is that meetup group still going?
I mean, it may be. I don't get to Vancouver often enough, but it was fantastic. It was the perspectives are just, they've always been so much fun. It was like, anarchistic is maybe too strong a word, but it was really, most folks had a very visionary and idealistic view about what the currency might become.
Fair. Well, that leads me good into my next question. So with things like Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies that have been kind of like battling a reputation as this digital enabler of criminal activities, and definitely have qualities like that anonymous component that don't help, that adds to it. How prevalent do you personally believe criminal use of crypto is? Like I've heard some interesting comments from other people, like cash is still king when it comes to that. Why would you want to put, your criminal activities on a ledger that's like a permanent record of your criminal activities? So I'd love to get your insights on it.
Yeah, sure. Let's say that we know it is used for criminal purposes. I think we can all start there, that there is some criminal use. of cryptocurrencies. We know that, for instance, in identity theft, Joker just logged his $1 billion of ID theft facilitated by crypto. We know that it's used in ransomware extensively. We know that it's used in romance scams. So it happens. Is it the best mechanism available? Probably not. Right? It's not as anonymous as cash. It's not as anonymous as gold or diamonds, or there are other mechanisms that are used. Trade-based money laundering is said to account for about 80% of the money laundered in the world, and is facilitated mostly by wires. You couldn't get near the value of trade with just crypto at the moment. So it's there, and it's on a lot of people's radars, but I think it's a little bit of a distraction from the key issue. The point is that as countries around the world are still grappling with how to control financial crime with more traditional financial mechanisms. So trying to blame it on crypto is really a red herring in my view.
I agree. I remember when I started kind of like learning about Bitcoin, I had a dear friend, and she made a comment that just really kind of, I think it shocked me and really made me think about money, because she said to me, she's like, I would never want to use a form of money that was used by criminals. And I just sat there kind of like, how do you pay for anything? Like what money on the planet has not been used by criminals? Like I was really shocked.
That's a fair point.
It was a beautiful, naive view of the world, frankly. But I was like, how do you transact? A lot of people have that belief. It's almost as if they think that their Canadian fiat currency has never been sullied by anything. And it's like, well, cash has always been like the number one form of like payment for any criminal activity. For isn't it kind of
yeah,
one of those statements where you're like, oh,
remarkable. I mean, the amount of traces of narcotics that are on fiat currency would blow you away when it comes down to it, right? I mean, the difference between fiat and in crypto is that nobody writes on the back of a $5 bill who's held it or where it's been, right? And so I agree with you. And initially when all of these national initiatives and the international initiatives to combat money laundering started, it was all about cash, right? It was about these volumes of cash and trying to keep them out of the system. So cash is certainly not is not without its flaws.
No, and I think another comment I had to laugh at this one. I was watching a video by Andreas Antonopoulos, and someone had asked him about Bitcoin's used for criminals and drug dealers and prostitutes, and he just looked at him and he's just like, well, I would argue that if you couldn't buy drugs or pay for sex with it, that it's not money. Like it's like, because it's like two of the oldest things in the world that people have paid for. So it's like, well, it's definitely an interesting way of looking at it, but it's also kind of true. Like if you couldn't actually pay for that service, it wouldn't actually be considered a form of money.
Fair enough.
All right, so my next question, it's a relatively new phenomenon that major corporations are starting to hold large amounts of digital currencies like Bitcoin on their balance sheets. And we've definitely heard about like Michael Saylor picking up, I think it was like 1.6 billion, and that incredible announcement by Tesla with 1.5 billion. So how is mainstream adoption changing the regulatory landscape? Is it helping to kind of like expedite the regulators to go, okay, we need to figure out how to get this regulated so more businesses can adopt it?
Yeah, they've been, listen, it's funny because in Canada, the regulations were adopted not so long ago that are coming to force shortly. They talk about how, even banks are going to be required to report large value crypto transactions. And the first time that came out, people are like, oh, well, when is a bank ever going to accept Bitcoin? Why does this even matter? Right. And you can now see that, it's gaining that widespread adoption, and the news is just rife with examples of companies that are using. And lately, there's been like the top 100 list of public companies who are holding crypto in their treasury. And so, it's really become an asset, and there's even guidance now on how banks can hold it in their treasury as part of their asset liability management. And so, if that's not the point at which we're saying this is here to stay, then I don't know what is.
Yeah, it's definitely, I find it really exciting times hearing like almost every day in the news, some other major company is looking like. Before we had Michael Saylor, PayPal is like, okay, businesses can now like accept, payments, or you can pay in cryptocurrency, and businesses can, convert that and accept it as a fiat currency if they choose to. And Visa was allowing for things. I think yesterday, or it was the day before, I was reading that MasterCard was now saying that people can pay in cryptocurrency. And in Florida, it's like you can pay your taxes with Bitcoin. And Amazon is looking at, was it Amazon, I think, looking at doing their own kind of digital currency. It kind of fascinates me. It's like, why would you want to compete with Bitcoin and do your own digital coin? Like, haven't we had like, 15,000 attempts at that already? But, Facebook's Libra wasn't a good example of why other cryptocurrencies could fail.
Fair
Outside
point.
of Bitcoin, I don't know. Yeah, so I'm really curious, with all of these major corporations that are picking up with Bitcoin adoption, how has this started impacting your businesses? Are they all coming to you like, oh my gosh, Matt, help us? How do we do this and stay compliant?
Yeah, well, the first thing I'm seeing, you might expect, is that with the volatility, with the press, there's lots more retail and institutional interest in the Bitcoin itself, and so that's leading to a lot more dealers in virtual currency, and we're getting tons of those calls. And it's really it really is leading to a renaissance in financial services, right? It's a new way of innovating and looking at ways to solve financial services problems that, at the beginning of this trend, I have to say, many of the initiatives that were coming just seem to be like trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. How do we say that we're dealing in a cryptocurrency just so we can raise money? But now it seems very hyper focused on what is the user experience, and how do we use the properties of a digital currency? How do we use a blockchain to make sure that a transaction is quick, a transaction is seamless, and so that's an amazing thing to see.
That's fantastic. So with all of this interesting pickup and adoption, you must be spending like a tremendous amount of time just dealing with regulators. Like how much of their understanding of cryptocurrencies, like how has it improved over the last few years? And can regulatory systems like better address this crazy growing market that we're in?
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'll tell you what it seems. It seems to me that regulators have a handle on a technology when they start to figure out regulations that make it most difficult to use. And so, and so they're starting to, as soon as there was regulation that talked about how they were going to deal with an unhosted wallet, it was clear to me that a regulator started to understand crypto and where the money laundering risks might lie, and how to make it difficult to use. And so, the regulatory knowledge is advancing. It's unfortunate that the problem is in many cases they're trying to apply traditional mechanisms to crypto, and they're not going to fit, and they're going to make it clunky. And the worst bit is that it makes it uncompetitive, right? Any each of these, despite a global coordination body, each country has to implement its own variety of controls over crypto, and the country that applies the most friction-filled controls is going to be the one that loses out, because the movement of capital, the movement of companies in a time when nobody's showing up to a physical office is instant, and so we have to think about balancing that competitiveness with the extent of control in a risk-sensitive way. That's the bit that's most frustrating. We talked a little bit about so to what extent is crypto used in crime, and it might be, but is it the thing that we want to spend all our resources on? And we only have so many dollars to spend on law enforcement and the constraint of crime. Is that what we're doing? Is we're going to double down on the idea of let's control wallets and dealers in virtual currency, or do we want to get more law enforcement outside of those regulations, who are actually conducting true financial intelligence analysis.
Yeah, definitely agree with that one. I was listening to that Michael Saylor interview Robert Breedlove did about I think it was like an 8-9 part series, and in one of them, it was really interesting to hear his thoughts on just the transaction, the movement of energy and of money of your Bitcoin. He's like, if you're dealing with, like a bank in New York and they're giving you rates that you don't like, you just go, well, I'll just pick up my Bitcoin and send it to Singapore because, and I could send it there within like, an hour with a couple $100 fee associated to it, which is pretty cheap. And they give me better rates. My money's just gone offshore. So in that kind of sense, because Bitcoin has created such a free market, such a global market for it, it's like you're just not restrained by traditional financial mechanisms of where you want to put or keep or store your money. It can really just go anywhere. And I'd be really fascinated to see how they would do like individual wallets, because you have like you have methods of being able to purchase cryptocurrency through like ATMs or through individual dealers or brokers. It's like not everyone's going to CoinSquare and spending it on their Visa or MasterCard, right? If I can go buy it for cash and put it into my own wallet, like how are you going to figure out that that's in that person's wallet? Is that really the best resources? Because that's going to turn into hundreds of millions of wallets,
That is absolutely the
big
point.
waste of time.
Yeah, well, and you can, so they're trying to focus on who receives it, right? The person that receives it is the one who's responsible for reporting, and but only in at certain levels. And as I mean, you could have an infinite number of wallets, and you can transfer them in any number of directions. It's it's not to say I don't think we should throw up our hands and say it's impossible to regulate. I just think we have to think about what is the right mechanism. And I gave a speech to law enforcement with the RCMP and FinTrack's head of macro analysis, and that was he had the right view, I think, which was FinTrack's head of macro analysis. His view was, listen, I'm excited that the blockchain is public. I mean, I used to have to rely on each institution reporting to me wire transactions and large cash transactions. I can look at it all on a chain at once. And with software like the folks at Blockchain Intelligence Group have, you can start to make inferences about the countries that transactions are that transactions touch, and there's lots of investigative potential and intelligent ways to attack this. Does it mean that the consumer has to be impacted? Does it mean that the dealer has to be impacted? Does it mean that everybody who deals with a virtual currency transaction becomes a regulated entity? No. But yeah, there it is.
I'd really love to figure out how the regulators are going to solve for the age-old commented, or like, it's just hilarious when you're dealing with Bitcoin. It's just like I lost it in a boating accident. I've been hearing that one for years. It's just like, I lost my crypto in a boating accident. It's just like, good luck finding it if they say that.
Well, and there's actually, so there's, it's funny, but like, I presented with Greg Azef from Miller Thompson, who was dealing with the Quadriga matter, and that's one of the fascinating quandaries here is the seizure of a Bitcoin. There's a fellow in Germany right now who's at year number 3 of refusing to provide the private key. And the question is, what mechanism do we have to have him give that up? And the answer is very little. When it comes down to it, you could find somebody in contempt, but contempt is meant to provoke an action to get somebody to comply with an order, but you can't jail somebody indefinitely for contempt, right? And so it leads down this road of well, what do you do if the private key is not submitted? And so it's caused a lot of trouble. It's caused a lot of new challenges in asset recovery.
That's fascinating. So someone in Germany has the private key to something in the Quadriga, and he's not even in Canada, and they're finding him in contempt.
Oh, sorry, in Germany, not related to Quadriga. This fellow in Germany has been asked to surrender his Bitcoin as part of a fraud case, and he refuses to give up the key. And the authorities there are saying, yeah, well, we have ways to make sure he doesn't use it, and we're all saying, well, that's cute, but you don't. You could track it like afterwards a little bit, but yeah, it creates a whole new set of problems.
Oh, and also technology is kind of advancing beyond that too. It's just like he could move it, he could put into a Wasabi wallet, he could coin join, he could split
He
and
could,
put into like
yeah.
1,000 different wallets, and you just have no idea. It's like a batch transaction with a coin join. That'd be very fascinating for regulators to figure that one out. But it's such a fascinating world. I want to thank you so much for being on our podcast today. I really loved your insights and your knowledge. I definitely want to get you back because I'd love to hear some more of your fascinating tales and some of the court cases that you've been in and all the incredible stuff that you do in the anti-money laundering space.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
All right, thank you so much. Okay, so I'm going to end the recording.